Above me, a ceiling fan dripped honey, like goo, pulsing like a failing heart, smelling of antiseptic. I watched my own hand move, tracing the map, as fresh crimson stain with a fingertip that felt both mine and not. The radio crackled, static dissolving into my own choked gasp. David Nightingale, screaming into the void. Kael, the cat with fur like a beetle, a iridescent shell, purred against my leg. A low vibration I felt in my molars, ignoring the ash, powdered air that coated my tongue with the taste of bitter almonds. The map, sus bloodstains mapped my path. A slow, viscous smear spreading from the lighthouse to the bridge, each stain a fresh wound. I dragged Kael toward the bridge, the map, as crimson veins aligning with the radio, as recording of my own voice, a sickening harmony. Drip, drop, thick, like congealing blood on a rusted railing. Each drop echoed in the hollow of my skull, a metronome counting down the ash. Fall. The ash fell like snow, but colder, heavier, sticking to the bridge, iron railing. I could feel its grit between my fingers as I traced the map. It's the latest bloodstain, a new one bleeding from the lighthouse window. The radio, a scream looped, a tape loop of my own terror. Kael, as purr shifted, a higher frequency, his tail twitching precisely 100 meters north, not toward the sea, but inland, where the forest swallowed the road. The map, his bloodstains, did lie. I turned, the cold ash swirling around my ankles, and saw it. The porcelain mask, glinting in the grey ash, fall, hollow eyes smooth and white as bone china, reflecting the bruised twilight. It stood exactly where Kael, his tail had twitched, the mask tilted, the ash swirling around it in a perfect, unnatural spiral. I didn't move, my body didn't react. I was just the ghost watching the lighthouse keeper, the haunted man, the one who de-mapped his own end. The mask, its porcelain surface was flawless, no seams, no flaws. I could see the ash swirling into its hollow eyes, the perfect spiral forming within the void. The radio scream cut off abruptly, replaced by the drip, drop heavier now, like thick syrup falling onto a metal surface. Kael froze, his iridescent fur catching the weak light, his tail still, the twitching gone. He was a beacon, the herald signaling the antagonist. Exact distance, 100 meters. The mask, as hollow eyes, blinked slowly, deliberately. The ash spiraled faster, a miniature tornado of grey dust, swirling into the perfect spiral the map, as bloodstains had predicted. I felt the weight of the bridge beneath my feet, the iron cold through my worn boots. The taste of almonds lingered, metallic, but deeper now, like the taste of my own ending. The map, bloodstains pulsed faintly, glowing with a light that wasn't teeth there, aligning perfectly with the mask's position. The porcelain mask, as hollow eyes blinked again, the ash swirling into the spiral, the sound of the drip, drop echoing in the sudden, absolute silence. The ash tasted like something ancient, something ground to dust and breathed back into the air. Almonds, yes, but deeper, a mineral bitterness that coated my tongue and clung to the back of my throat. I watched my hand, the hand of David Nightingale, the lighthouse keeper, the ghost, as it moved, tracing the crimson smear on the map. A fresh wound bloomed on my palm, mirroring the stain, a stigmata of this cursed place. It felt not pain, precisely, but a resonance, a sympathetic vibration with the map's unfolding horror. Each step onto the bridge was a calculation, a gamble. The map didn't lie. Its bloodstains weren't ink, they were prophecy. I counted. 1 footfall, 2, 3, the ash crunching under my worn boots, a brittle susurrus against the silence. The radio's looped scream was a phantom limb, a constant ache in the air. Oh, the drip drop, a slow, insistent pulse against the backdrop of the ashfall. My own heartbeat began to sink, a counterpoint to the falling grey. The map's bloodstain pulsed, a faint crimson glow beneath my fingertips. It wasn't merely undo the map. It was Studiov, a Fiof, it an extension of the place itself. I took another step, testing the accuracy, the dreadful certainty of its predictions. The map's crimson bled further, a fresh stain appearing precisely where my next foot would land. I felt it then, a tremor in the iron beneath my boot, a preemptive echo of the impact, the drip, drop. Accelerated, mimicking the frantic tempo of my internal reckoning. Kael, the beetle-shelled cat, watched me, his iridescent fur catching the bruised twilight. He didn't purr. He simply observed, a silent witness to my slow, measured descent. His tail, a twitching compass, pointed inland, towards the forest's encroaching darkness. The map's bloodstains didn't lie. They weren't simply marking a path, they were charting a convergence. A destination! The porcelain mask! I saw it again, that blank, unsettling visage. The ash swirled around it, a silent ballet of grey dust. It stood exactly where Kael's tail had indicated. 100 meters, the distance felt less like a measurement and more like a sentence. The mask's eyes, hollow and white, seemed to bore into me, not with malice, but with a detached, clinical observation, as if I were a specimen under glass. I forced myself to breathe, the ash-laden air a rasp against my lungs. The radio's scream had ceased, leaving only the trip a drop. Now a frantic tattoo against the silence. It wasn't just water, it was something thicker, heavier, something that clung to the metal with a viscous persistence. I tried to think, to analyze, to apply some semblance of logic to this unfolding madness, but the map's crimson stained my thoughts, blurring the lines between cause and effect. The map's bloodstain moved. It wasn't a gradual diffusion, a spreading of ink. It shifted, a deliberate relocation across the bridge's surface, aligning itself with Kael's position. A tremor ran through the iron railing beneath my hand, a subtle vibration that resonated deep within my bones. The ash swirled faster, a miniature vortex around the porcelain mask, obscuring it momentarily before revealing it again. Pristine and unsettling. The map's crimson path was now converging on Kael. A new stain bloomed, directly beneath the cat's paws. A crimson promise of something inevitable. I felt a profound sense of, not fear, but inevitability. A recognition that this was not a journey to be avoided, but a destination to be reached. A final accounting. I looked at my hand, the stigmata bleeding, mirroring the map's crimson path. The metallic taste intensified, coating my tongue, a bitter confirmation of my fate. The trip drop was almost deafening now, a relentless countdown. Kael's fur ignited, not with heat, but with a visual distortion, a shimmering that fractured the grey ash, fall into 1,000 fleeting rainbows. It wasn't a pleasant iridescence. The beetle shell sheen seemed to vibrate, to Fuithrum with an unnatural energy. A high-pitched whine, barely audible beneath the radio's defunct scream, began to emanate from him. A sound that resonated deep within my skull, a frequency that felt less heard and more sooty experienced. It wasn't a purr. It was something else, something akin to the strange resonance of a violin string about to snap. The map's crimson stain pulsed, a frantic heartbeat mirroring Kael's agitation. It wasn't a subtle shift. The blood seemed to high leap, a sudden, violent bloom across the iron bridge, expanding outward as if propelled by some unseen force. The ash stung my eyes, a gritty film coating my lids, blurring the already muted twilight. I tasted grit, a fine powder coating my tongue, a metallic tang that amplified the bitter almonds already lingering from the map's touch. My boots crunched on the ash, each footfall a discordant note against the rising whine from Kael. The drip, drop, quickened, mimicking the frantic tempo of the cat's breathing. It wasn't just water, it was viscous, clinging to the metal railing with a tenacity that felt almost sentient. I could smell it now, a sickly sweetness layered beneath the almonds, a cloying aroma that threatened to overwhelm me. It tasted like loss. The porcelain mask remained stationary, a silent sentinel at the bridge's edge. Its blank white eyes seemed to track Kael's distress, not with malice, but with an unsettling detachment, a clinical observation. I felt a familiar wave of alienation wash over me, a profound sense of disconnection from my own body, from my own surroundings. I was an observer, a ghost trapped within a decaying vessel. The map's crimson now charted Kael's position precisely. A new stain blossomed directly beneath his paws, a crimson promise etched onto the iron. It wasn't gradual, it was instantaneous, as if the blood had been drawn from the landscape itself and deposited there. The tremor in the railing intensified, vibrating through my bones, a premonition of something about to break. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, a bitter confirmation of my impending doom. Kael let out a sound, a strangled gasp that morphed into that high-pitched whine, a desperate plea rendered in an inhuman frequency. It was a sound that bypassed my ears and resonated directly within my skull, a physical assault on my sanity. My hand clenched, the stigmata throbbing, mirroring the map's crimson path. The ash swirled faster, a miniature vortex around the porcelain mask, momentarily obscuring it before revealing it again, pristine and unsettling. I tried to focus, to analyze, to impose some semblance of order onto the chaos. But the map's crimson stained by thoughts, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. Each breath was a struggle, the ash-laden air heavy and oppressive. My lungs burned, my muscles ached. I felt a profound weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that transcended mere physical fatigue. It was the exhaustion of a soul slowly unraveling. The cat's agitation escalated. His body convulsed, a frantic dance of iridescent fur and twitching limbs. The whine intensified, escalating into a piercing shriek that threatened to shatter my eardrums. I wanted to shield my ears, to block out the sound, but I was paralyzed, trapped within this decaying shell. The map's bloodstain pulsed, a rhythmic beacon guiding the unfolding horror. Then it happened. The map's crimson shrin leapt, not a diffusion, not a spreading, but a sudden violent transfer. A crimson stain bloomed directly onto Kael's fur, a vibrant, unnatural mark against his iridescent shell. The cat froze, his body rigid, his eyes wide and unseeing. The high-pitched whine abruptly ceased, leaving only the frantic southern drip. Drop! And the crunch of ash beneath my boots. The ash fell like shattered glass, each flake a tiny shard reflecting the dim light from the dying star P13. It crunched underfoot, a symphony of brittle fractures that echoed through my bones, resonating with the slow throb in my palm where I decarved the map, S coordinates into flesh. The taste of bitter almonds lingered, coating my tongue like a thick syrup, threatening to choke me. The bridgestones pulsed beneath my boots, a rhythmic heartbeat that seemed to count down the seconds until... What? Until P13 failed, completely plunging us all into eternal night. Until the porcelain mask owner found us here on this bridge to nowhere. I could shake off this impending doom. It was as tangible as the ash falling around me. I watched as bloodstains bloomed anew on the stones, vines of crimson creeping along the iron like some grotesque parody of ivy. It wasn't a slow spread. Each stain appeared fully formed, as if etched onto reality itself by an unseen hand. The bridge groaned under this unnatural growth, its metallic rasp echoing through me like a warning from deep within the earth. Yes, core. Kael stood frozen at the edge of this crimson path, his iridescent fur vibrating with that same high-pitched whine I'd heard earlier. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was sensation, filling my skull until there was no room left for thought or reason. The map lay in ashes beside him, its ink shivering as if alive, tracing out Kael's path on the stone. My hand throbbed where I'd burned the map, but new stigmata bloomed nonetheless, each one a fresh wound weeping blood that seemed to feed these growing stains beneath my feet. The drop of liquid from above echoed through the bridge stones now, a slow metronome marking time towards some inevitable crescendo. I tried to move forward towards Kael and whatever end awaited us at this crimson path as terminus, but my boots seemed glued to the stone. Each step required an effort that felt akin to wading through deep water, each footfall heavier than the last until I was trudging through mud rather than ash. The bridge breathed around me, its metallic rusk now punctuated by groans and moans as if in pain. It pulsed with life under my hands when I leaned against it for support, a rhythmic throb that seemed to resonate deep within my own flesh. This wasn't just a bridge anymore. It was alive, sentient, aware of our presence here on its back. The ash swirled around me like a miniature storm, momentarily obscuring Kael before revealing him again through gaps in the falling debris. His eyes were fixed not ahead, but downwards at his own reflection shimmering within one particularly large bloodstained pool. That whine intensified, filling my skull until there was nothing left but that high-pitched scream and the pounding of my own heart echoing it. Then came another sound, a slow drop from above, heavier than before. It wasn't tea water, it sounded more like molten metal being forced through some unseen funnel. I looked up just as something heavy splashed onto my face, hot enough to scald but not burn. When I wiped at it with trembling hands, they came away coated in thick, viscous blood. The bridge stones swelled around me now, bulging upwards like tumors under the pressure of this new growth. They pulsed faster still, their rhythm matching Kael, a swine note for note until everything seemed to resonate together. Stone Cat Man, all bound by some unseen force into one throbbing entity. And then, without warning or ceremony, a fresh bloodstain bloomed directly beneath my boots. It wasn't just another vine. It was an entire garden of crimson tendrils snaking outwards from the center like roots, seeking purchase in barren soil. I watched as they spread across the stone surface, weaving patterns that seemed almost deliberate before finally coming to rest at Kael's paws. The cat looked up then, his eyes meeting mine for just a moment before he turned and began walking along this new path, laid out by bloodstains alone. There was nothing left but to follow him into whatever fate awaited us at its end. The lighthouse loomed, a skeletal finger pointing towards a starless sky. I ran, boots pounding against the ash-choked path, the taste of bitter almonds a constant suffocating presence. Kael, a blur of iridescent movement, darted ahead, his fur vibrating with that unsettling whine, a discordant note against the backdrop of falling ash. I ignored it, pushing through the resistance of the air, the urgency of physical weight in my chest. The radio, stubbornly clinging to life within the lighthouse, crackled and hissed. A low thrum, a subterranean growl, preceded the sound. Then a voice. My voice distorted, warped, but undeniably mine, screaming coordinates. I'm still here. It rasped, the words tearing through the static like shards of glass. It wasn't a message, it was a violation, a mocking echo of a self I no longer recognized. The drip-drop from above accelerated, a frantic percussion against the stone. It wasn't water, but something thicker, heavier, the consistency of viscous oil. I pivoted, expecting to find the porcelain mask, the relentless slasher, but there was only the lighthouse wall, and on it a bloom of crimson. Not the slow, creeping stain of before, but a sudden violent blossoming as if a wound had opened directly into the stone. It was fresh, wet, reflecting the dim starlight in a sickening sheen. The metallic rasp of the wind seemed to intensify, a mournful sigh echoing through the tower's hollow core. My lungs burned with the effort of breathing, the air thick with the scent of dust and something else, something akin to ozone, sharp and unsettling. The map, discarded in my haste, lay crumpled on the ground, its ink bleeding into the ash, forming a crude circle around the lighthouse, a cage of bloodstains. The ash swirled, a miniature vortex, momentarily obscuring the lighthouse before revealing it again, stark and imposing against the inky sky. I felt Kael's presence beside me, a subtle shift in the air, a vibration against my skin. His eyes, those multifaceted jewels, were fixed not on me, but on his own reflection shimmering within a puddle of rainwater pooled on the stone. The whine escalated, a high-pitched keening that resonated deep within my skull, blurring the edges of reality. The drip-drop intensified, a relentless rhythm driving me towards some unknown precipice. The lighthouse itself seemed to shift, to breathe. The stones weren't merely supporting the structure, they were sought partout of it, organic and pulsing with an unsettling vitality. The scent of dust mingled with the sickly sweet aroma of decay, coating my tongue like a film. I pressed a hand against the wall, expecting cold, unyielding stone, but felt instead a damp, yielding surface like the skin of some immense, slumbering beast. Another voice, faint and distant, threaded through the static of the radio. A whisper in an unknown tongue too fleeting to decipher, yet leaving a lingering sense of dread. The lighthouse seemed to lean towards me, a silent, predatory posture. My vision tunneled, the world shrinking to the circumference of the crimson stain on the wall. The bloodstain wasn't just on the wall, it was tide-growing, spreading upwards, a creeping tendril of crimson snaking across the stone. It wasn't a stain anymore, it was a vine, a parasitic growth consuming the lighthouse itself. The ash continued to fall, a constant, suffocating snowfall, coating everything in a layer of grey despair. The taste of bitter almonds intensified, a corrosive burn in my throat. The metallic rasp of the lighthouse grew louder, morphing into a groaning protest as the bloodstain reached the first window, obscuring the view of the starless sky. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to shatter the oppressive silence, but my voice seemed trapped, a prisoner within my own throat. The radio crackled again, my voice returning, a fragmented echo of my former self. I'm still here, it repeated, a desperate plea lost in the static. The crimson vine continued its ascent, a relentless tide washing over the stone. It reached the window frame, then the glass itself, obscuring the already dim light. The drip-drop quickened to a frantic drumbeat, each drop a hammer blow against my sanity. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this unfold from a distance, a silent observer of my own demise. The bloodstain reached the base of the lantern, a creeping tendril of crimson snaking around the metal casing. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread. The whine from Kael intensified, a desperate warning lost in the escalating chaos. I tried to move, to intervene, but my limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. I was a prisoner in my own body, forced to witness my own destruction. The taste of bitter almonds was overwhelming now, a suffocating syrup coating my tongue. The vine reached the lantern glass, a crimson tendril obscuring the light, casting the lighthouse in deeper shadow. The metallic rasp of the structure intensified, a final mournful sigh before the inevitable. The radio sputtered and died, leaving only the relentless drip-drop and the keening whine of the cat. And then the final horrifying moment, the bloodstain began to creep through the lantern glass. The bridge stretched ahead, a skeletal spine of weathered granite and blackened iron, its rails slick with a fine, gritty rain. Not water, settling like a second skin over everything, a slow, relentless suffocation. I crouched at the edge of the road, my fingers digging into the damp earth. The map spread beneath me. The ink was alive, writhing like a thing with purpose. It had been a simple thing once, a faded blueprint of the town, the bridge, the lighthouse, but now it breathed. The bloodstains pulsed at the edges, dark and viscous, tracing Kael's path like a second set of eyes. Kael was already moving, not the darting, iridescent blur of before, but something slower, deliberate. His fur drank in the dim light, shifting between shades of obsidian and bruised violet, the facets of his scales catching the last of the dying sun. The air hummed with his agitation, a low, discordant thrum that vibrated through my bones. He didn't whine now, he didn't need to. The map had spoken for him. The bridge groaned, not the creak of wood or the sigh of metal, but something deeper, wetter. The stones beneath my knees frithrobbed. I pressed a palm against one of the larger slabs, expecting cold, expecting hardness, but the surface yielded, warm and slick, like the flesh of some great, sleeping thing. The ash clung to my skin, not as dust, but as a living film, a second layer of something. That wasn't mine! My tongue swelled against the roof of my mouth, the taste of bitter almonds sharpening, a slow poison. I swallowed, it burned, the map's ink swirled. Not a stain, not a mark. The lines themselves serene moved, dark tendrils coiling and uncoiling like serpents in ink. The bridge's outline flickered, the stones shifting, expanding, as if the very structure were being queen-drawn into existence by the blood. The bridge wasn't just a bridge anymore. It was a faux thing, a living thing, its veins the crimson tendrils snaking across the paper. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something older, something twinferal. The ash fell faster now, a storm of sharp, needle-like particles, each one a tiny wound against my skin. Kael's reflection in the puddle wasn't his own. The water had gone dark, not the black of night, but the deep, bruised purple of a wound. His image shimmered, distorted, his multifaceted eyes catching the light in a way that made my stomach lurch. The ink on the map siffled him, pulled him, tendrils of bloodstain writhing like fingers, reaching, forming. The lines coalesced, the bridge's shape dissolving into something else entirely, a snarling, iridescent quite-eye cat, its body a shifting mosaic of scales and shadow. The whine in the air sharpened, a high-pitched keening that set my teeth on edge. The map's bloodstains screamed. The bridge's stones pulsed in time with the drip-drop of the ash. Not a fall, not a drift. The particles soofed and splattered, thick and heavy, each one a wet, sticky thuthud against the iron rails. The sound wasn't random. It was surfifind, a heartbeat. The bridge's heartbeat, the map's heartbeat, my own, stolen and returned to me in a way that made my vision swim. Kael didn't flinch. He didn't need to. The ink on the map had stopped moving. The bloodstains weren't tendrils anymore. They were twin eyes. Two of them, fixed on Kael. The bridge's stones throbbed in unison, a slow, wet futoof that echoed through the hollow of my skull. The ash fell harder, a storm of tiny, jagged teeth, and I tasted copper, thick and metallic, coating my tongue like a second skin. The map imploded, not a collapse, not a tear. The bloodstained sea folds inward, a violent inward breath, the ink twisting, coiling, sucking itself into Kael's fur. His scales darkened, the iridescent sheen bleeding out, replaced by a sickly bruised purple that matched the wound in the puddle. The bridge's stones stilled. The drip-drop stopped. The air went silent. For a second, there was only the weight of the ash on my shoulders, the bitter almonds in my throat, the map's ink burning into Kael's flesh. Then the bridge, moved. The water wasn't cold. Not initially. It was a thick, viscous embrace, resisting my descent like oil, a muted pressure built against my eardrums not from depth, but from the sheer weight of the river itself. Kael's iridescent fur, usually a shifting kaleidoscope, now trailed behind me, a bruised violet smear against the darkening water. Each strand seemed to pull at the surface, dragging down droplets that didn't fall, but often splattered, heavy and deliberate, with a wet foot against the bridge's underside. The sound wasn't the delicate percussion of rain, it was the insistent beat of something vast and submerged. My lungs burned, not for air, but for the absence of it. The taste of bitter almonds intensified, coating my tongue with a gritty metallic film. It wasn't a taste anymore, it was a text anymore, a rasp against the back of my throat, a tightening in my chest. The river accepted me slowly, deliberately, and the ash, suspended in the water, stung my skin like 1,000 tiny needles. It wasn't a prickling sensation, but a searing burn, as if the particles themselves were dissolving into my flesh. Below the surface, the river wasn't water. It was a substance, a viscous, bruised plum color that clung to me, seeking to become part of me. The current didn't pull, it absorbed. Each movement felt less like swimming and more like sinking into something yielding and vast. I opened my eyes. Visibility was minimal. The water wasn't opaque. It was so dense, filled with swirling particles, each one a miniature reflection of the bridge above. And the blood, Kael's fur, shedding the map's ink, released the crimson into the water. It wasn't a dispersal. It was a flow, a thick arterial pulse that spread, not outwards but toward downwards, tracing a path along the riverbed. The ink, now liberated, didn't dissolve. It coalesced, forming darker, swirling currents, a network of crimson veins beneath the surface. The river was accepting it, drinking it in, becoming confused with the map's purpose. I tried to orient myself to fight against the downward pull, but it was useless. The current wasn't a force of nature. It was a deliberate act, a guiding hand, or rather, a guiding foot current, leading me towards something unseen. The water sucked inwards, a wet, gurgling sound that resonated within my skull, a hollow echo of my own dwindling heartbeat. The sensation wasn't just auditory, it was a physical pressure, a tightening around my chest, a squeezing of my lungs. The riverbed wasn't stone, it was flesh-warm, yielding, and covered in a slick gelatinous film. Each step, each movement, sank into the substance, as if walking on the interior of some colossal beast. The bloodstains, no longer currents, began to converge. Not towards the bank, not towards the bridge supports, but towards me. They flowed not with the current, but against IFT, defying gravity, driven by an unseen force. They were no longer simply stains. They were forms, vague at first, indistinct, but growing, coalescing, taking shape. The bloodstains, the map's ink, Kael's shedding, all merging into something new, a pressure built against my chest. Not physical, but toiving of being watched, of being measured. The water around me darkened, the plum color deepening, becoming a bruised, almost black void. The ash, now a constant, stinging rain, felt less like particles and more like weight. A heavy, suffocating blanket pressing down on me. The bloodstains reached my chest, not as a fluid, but as a solid mass, a rising tide of crimson that pressed against my ribs. A new wound bloomed, not torn, not punctured, but formed. A perfect symmetrical opening in my flesh, mirroring the bridge's architecture, a new vein added to the river's growing network. It didn't hurt. There was no pain, no sensation. Only the cold, viscous embrace of the water, and the growing awareness that I was no longer swimming in the river. I was Ava. The riverbank was a wound raw, unstitched, the edges slick with something darker than mud. The ash no longer fell like snow. It sliced-eyed, each particle jagged as porcelain shards, catching the faintest glimmer from the bridge above. They bit into my shoulders, not as dust, but as teeth grinding against my skin with a sound like grinding glass. The map's bloodstain. No, not a stain, a furterbrand, was fresh here, still glistening, a thick viscous line that coiled upward from the river's edge like a vein trying to escape its vessel. It wasn't red. It was the color of old wine left too long in the sun, the hue of rust that had forgotten how to corrode. The air tasted of it, thick and syrupy, clinging to the back of my throat like the last sip of something spoiled. Kael's fur was gone now entirely. No iridescent tracery remained, no shifting bruise of violet and black. Only the cat's presence lingered, a weight against my ribs, a pressure that wasn't his, but 40 hertz of his pain, now mine. The river didn't move. The water was still, but not calm. It held its breath, thick and slow, like the moment before a thing decides to drown you. I followed the brand. The bridge stones weren't stone, they were teeth. Jagged, uneven, set too close together, grinding against each other with a low, resonant twinthrum like the hum of a saw cutting through bone. The sound wasn't in my ears. It was in my tweethy vibrating up through my jaw, shaking loose the fillings I didn't remember having. The ash fell in time with it. A staccato tap. Tap, tap against the metal railings, each impact sending a tremor through the bridge itself. The railings weren't cold. They were shooey alive, a lattice of nerves twitching at the touch of my fingers. I didn't pull away. I pressed harder. The bloodstain led me back, not to the river, not to the water, to the bridge's side heart, where the planks split open like a mouth, where the iron girders sagged inward, not from age but from hunger. The stain wasn't a line anymore. It was a footy map, not of the river, but of the bridge itself, a network of veins spreading across the wood, the stone, the metal, drinking it all in. The bridge wasn't a structure, it was a footy body, and the stain was its blood, pumping backward against the current, against the laws of how things should bleed. The ash didn't fall, it twid rosy from the river. From the cracks in the stones, from the seams where the planks had split, it bubbled up, not as dust, but as 20 teeth, grinding together in the air, forming shapes, words, a language that wasn't sound but fresher, pressing against my skull, my ribs, my lungs. It wasn't a whisper, it was a scream, unvoiced, unbearable, the sound of something trying to be born and failing again and again. The bridge sung, not with voices, with teeth the stones. The stones weren't singing, they were chewing. The vibration wasn't in the air. It was in my sooty bones rattling them loose, shaking them into place, rearranging me into something that fit the bridge's hunger better. The stain at my chest. No, not a stain. A southern mouth pulsed, not with blood, but with tuvin, inhaling, exhaling a rhythm that wasn't mine, but the bridges, the rivers, the cats, all of it breathing through me. The map wasn't a map, it was a tusa-tu. And it was opening, not to swallow me, to speak. The words weren't in any language I knew. They were in the Suvi shape of things. Teeth, veins, the way the ash ground together, the way the bridge's iron groaned, the way my own ribs footy tracked. Not from force, but from sudry growth, from the stain's hunger, from the river's pull, from the cat's pain, now mine, now theirs so. The bridge wasn't a bridge, it was a throat, and it was swallowing itself whole. The map felt brittle beneath my fingers, the blood stain erased scabrous ridge. I fed it to the flames, the paper curling and blackening with a hiss that tasted of bitter almonds. It didn't burn cleanly. It writhed, the ink blooming into a grotesque mockery of flowers before dissolving into ash. And from that ash, the stain reappeared, not as a line, but as a constellation of crimson freckles across my palms. They pulsed, a slow, sickening throb, mirroring the bridge's song. 100 meters! That's what Kael's presence signaled. 100 meters and the porcelain mask would be close enough to taste the fear clinging to my tongue. The drip-drop had stopped. A final, heavy thuffat against the stone, silencing the bridge's song, leaving only the grinding of my own teeth, Kael's fur. It wasn't fur anymore. It fractured. A million iridescent scales peeling away, each one a tiny beetle, a miniature echo of the bridge's hunger. They fell, not to the ground, but inward, dissolving into the stain blooming across my skin. The stain wasn't just on my palms now. It crawled, a slow, insidious tide, up my wrists, across my forearms, a network of veins blossoming beneath the surface of my skin. It felt warm. Not a comforting warmth, but the heat of something festering, something growing the map's ink content with my hands. It sought higher ground, tracing the contours of my bones, mapping the pathways of my blood. I tried to scrub it away, but the more I rubbed, the more it spread, the more it too became me. I could feel the bridge's song returning, not as a vibration, but as a pressure, a tightening in my chest, a constriction of my throat. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of overripe fruit, and something metallic, something that clung to the inside of my nostrils, a taste like licking a rusty nail. I wanted to scream, But my voice was caught, tangled in the bridge's song. A discordant note in its monstrous harmony. Kael was gone. Not just his fur, his presency. The weight against my ribs had vanished, leaving a hollowness that resonated with the bridge's hunger. I was alone, adrift in a sea of crimson veins, a living map for something I didn't understand. The porcelain mask was closer. I could feel it, a cold spot in the air, a prickling on the back of my neck. A certainty that something was watching, waiting by measuring. The stain reached my face, a suffocating embrace. It obscured my vision, blurring the edges of the bridge. The river, the sky. I saw my reflection in the water, or what was left of it. My skin was the color of old wine left too long in the sun, the rust of forgotten things. My eyes, once the color of slate, were now pools of crimson, reflecting the bridge's hunger, the mask's proximity. I tried to fight it, to claw my way back to something recognizable, something human, but the bridge's song was too strong, too pervasive. It was in my bones, my blood, my thoughts. It was rewriting me, reshaping me, turning me into a conduit for its monstrous will. The map's ink spread across my chest, a suffocating brand, a declaration of ownership. It covered my heart, my lungs, my stomach. I could feel it shifting, rearranging, molding itself to the contours of my internal organs. It wasn't pain. It was transformation, a slow, sickening metamorphosis. I closed my eyes, bracing for the porcelain mask, for the touch of something cold and unfeeling, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a swarm, a tickling sensation on my skin, a million tiny legs crawling across my face, my neck, my arms, the beetles. Kael shattered fur, reborn as a legion of iridescent insects. They weren't attacking, they were migrating. They moved with a purpose, a single unified intent. Not away from me, toward the bridge. A shimmering wave of chitin and segmented legs crawling across the stones, across the metal, towards the gaping maw that was once a bridge. The bridge sang louder now, a triumphant roar that shook the very foundations of the world. It was hungry, and they were offerings. The last vestige of David Nightingale, the lighthouse keeper, the man who remembered a life before the ash and the bridge, the cat, the stain. It vanished, replaced by something else. Something that felt the bridge's hunger as its own. Something that understood the language of the grinding stones, the whispering ash, the pulsing veins. The beetles reached the bridge's mouth, a living tide of iridescent scales, disappearing into the darkness within. And as they vanished, the bridge sang a new verse. A verse that resonated not in my ears, but in my very being. A verse that welcomed me home. A verse that promised a feast. The map's crimson veins pulsed against my sternum, a slow, wet heartbeat beneath the skin. I felt the porcelain mask's presence like a physical weight, a cold spot blooming between my shoulder blades. It didn't move toward me, it flowed, a silent ripple in the ashfall, the air thickening with the scent of overripe plums and the metallic tang of pennies left in rain. The drip-drop had ceased, the stone beneath my feet held its breath. I watched the bridge, no longer stone, but a shifting mass of shadow and half-remembered wood splinter. Not with a crack, but 1,000 tiny fractures, each fracture releasing a single thick droplet of copper-tinged liquid that fell with a sound like a pin dropping into wet silk. Each drop struck the river's surface, not creating ripples, but tawdry becoming vor. The iridescent beetle fur of Kael was gone. Only the memory of its cold, chitinous weight remained, a ghost against my ribs where his fur had been. The stain spread upward, not crawling but unfurling, a slow, deliberate map of crimson veins tracing the path of my collarbone, the hollow of my throat. It felt less like invasion and more like a slow, inevitable bloom, petals of blood and ink unfurling across my skin. I tried to pull my hand away, but the stain had become my skin's second layer, warm and slightly damp, like the inside of a wound left to fester. The bitter almond taste flooded my mouth, sharp and cloying, the scent of the map's final, writhing breath. The bridge's song returned, not as sound, but as a pressure in my temples, a tightening behind my eyes. The river beneath the bridge's crumbling edge didn't flow, it swallowed. The water darkened, deepening to a color like old wine left too long in a cellar, and the bridge, the stone, the riverbank all dissolved into that single suffocating shade. The map's ink wasn't just on my skin anymore. It was the river, it was the ash falling like snow. It was the taste of copper on my tongue, the cold weight of the mask pressing closer, its porcelain edge now brushing the back of my neck, a sensation like a sliver of ice against my skin. I saw it then. The river wasn't just swallowing the bridge, it was becoming the map. The river's surface, the dark, viscous water, rippled not with current but with the slow, deliberate lines of the map's bloodstains, the constellation of freckles blooming across its surface. The bridge, the riverbank, the stones, all dissolving into the river, into the map. The final droplet fell, not from the bridge but from the mask itself. It hit the river's surface, and the river absorbed it, the water shifting from dark wine to a deeper, richer crimson, the ink of the map's final, unbroken line. The river became the map, swallowing the bridge whole, the stones, the riverbank, the bridge's final, crumbling song. I felt the river's current pull through my skin, a slow, insistent drag toward the center of the map, the heart of the stain. The porcelain mask's cold edge pressed deeper, not to cut, but to fruit claim. The river's dark, living ink flowing into my veins, the map's final, endless line. The river became the map.